This is my really large pan. It's a, well actually I do have bigger pans out in the garage, but this is my main one I use like as a soup pot. Typically I use a heavy bottom pan that's about 8 quarts, but this is I think about 12. It's because I got about 1.5 gallons of milk in here. And the process is, essentially you have to heat your milk. It affects the protein structures in the milk itself so that it can go ahead and thicken up properly, from what I understand. The process I use and I've read about online is usually heating to about 190 degrees, and I usually use my little instant read thermometer. I've got a couple of them laying around here. Here's one of them, looks like that. And I just usually double check the temperature. I just put this milk on here a few minutes ago, so it's going to be nowhere near that yet. But once it gets close and reaches that point, I will start watching it and checking the temperature frequently. If you use a good heavy bottom pot, you don't have to stir it too crazy often. But if your pot is in any way thin, you better watch it close because the milk will stick on the bottom, and burned milk on the bottom is not fun to clean up. Once your milk reaches that 190 so on its temp, go ahead and kill the heat, and then it has to cool down, and I will show you the next process. I can tell you there has been a couple times I've accidentally forgotten it and letting it get all the way up to the boiling point, and it still worked fine, but it just kind of affects the flavor just a little bit. I didn't mind it. Some people may, excuse me, but in general, anywhere between 190 and the boiling point, you should be okay. Alright, we are just about there. It looks like it was reading 190 when I put it in. I lifted it out a little. It's certainly close enough I can probably kill the heat at this point. One thing I want to warn you is as the milk heats, it tends to form a skin on top, and that skin is completely, totally normal. You can take it out if you don't like it. I don't really think it hurts anything. I just kind of stir it all around and it gets stirred on back in. And I think we're just about there. Try not to lose my grip on the thermometer. I think some people actually only take their yogurt to about 180. So this is probably completely fine. I think with carryover cooking and stuff, it's probably not a big deal. I know there a minute ago I had gotten a 190. Let's see. I can also check my other thermometer. I have 2 of them. The funny thing why I have 2 of them is the first one was lost in the move last time that we had. Oh, we're in a similar zone here. The first one was lost in a move that I had last time, and I ended up giving up after several months and finally repurchased another one off of Amazon. And then no sooner than we repurchased that, of course, the other one turns up. So I now have 2 of these, but it's kind of extra good for checking the temp. Honestly, I think this is close enough. So, like we're half a degree away. I think we're good. So I am going to kill the heat and give it an extra stir. This particular pan does not seem to be as good as the other one I usually use. I usually use I think it's like 6 to 8 quart or so. It's an induction pot. I like the thick bottoms. This one is too, but it just does not have quite as thick of an induction bottom as the other one. Now the next thing I want to show you is my crock pot filled with hot water, and I take a bacon rack and I put it on top. And then what I do, and I already got this heating now, the reason why is after the yogurt cools down enough to incubate it with another yogurt batch, and then once it's incubated, I set it on here, and I will try to show you that. It has to stay warm. You want to keep it up around 100 degrees or so. That way it can do its thing and the bacteria can work. But I have found, because I don't have an oven that will maintain a really low enough temperature, the crock pot with a rack on top and some warm water in it does a beautiful job. In theory, you could cook a meal at the same time, but you'd have to do it with the lid off, so I usually don't do that. But this keeps it pretty well perfect. The only odd thing I do is once I have my jars set on top of here, I wrap a towel around it to kind of hold the heat in, and that usually holds it pretty good. Right now I got it high because I want to keep the water nice and warm since nothing's on it. But when I'm incubating, I'll usually take it down to keep warm, and it usually does a good job. Now that this has reached the temperature, I'm ready for it to start cooling off. You cannot incubate yogurt at this current hot temperature of around 190. You have to let it cool down to at least about 115, or you will kill the bacteria in your yogurt. And I am going to try to do this while holding my camera. We'll see. I will probably slap it all over the counter though. But what I do is I put it into these jars. Okay. Actually, I'm gonna go get my tripod. Okay, hopefully you can see. Well, I just put it into these jars. I do tend, if I'm doing a large batch, I prefer the quart jars. And the reason why is I just don't want so many jars in my fridge. You can use whatever size jar you like. If you want, you can use plastic. I've got plastic deli containers that would be a whole lot easier to use, but I don't, just because where I'm ladling this in and it's still quite hot, I don't want to leach chemicals from the plastic. I don't mind using the plastics for some of our cold storage. Oops, see, I just went all over the counter. But I just don't really dig the idea of storing this yogurt, which is also going to have a little bit of natural acid to it, just in those plastic containers for a while. As you can see, my little jar funnel is not helping me that much because I'm trying to do this and talk and trying to turn my voice to the camera so you guys can hear me. But essentially, you're just ladling this very hot, again, whole milk into your jars. You don't have to have a canning funnel, but it does help. If I didn't have it, I'd be making a much bigger mess. I have no idea how much this will make. I had 1.5 gallons roughly of milk that I keated. So 4 quarts to 1 gallon. That's why I got 4 quart jars out, and then these extra small ones. So we'll see how much it ends up making. One annoying thing, and it's not a big deal, of doing different size jars at the same time is they cool at different rates. So you will find that your quart jars take longer to cool down and reach the proper temperature to do your inoculation than what the small pint jars, or even if you use half pints. That's a little frustrating because then you got to remember a couple times to keep watching your time and your temperature and checking it every so often so you inoculate at the right times. Once you do your inoculation, you can, quit using timers and reminders and just let it set. And then what I do is that once I inoculate it, put it on the crock pot. I might check the temperature once or twice through the day, but I don't really have to because I've done it enough now that I know the crock pot's going to hold it at that temperature. And then usually by evening time after dinner, the yogurt is plenty finished, and then I can take it, cap it, and put it on into the fridge, and then we'll have plenty of yogurt. I've actually multiplied the same batch of yogurt, I don't know, for a few months now. I'll just use the previous batch as an inoculation. I know some people buy yogurt starters. I really don't know if that's any better or what have you. I've just always used my yogurt, and I've always started with a store-bought yogurt. It's important that you start with a similar yogurt that's like a plain whole milk yogurt. I either use the Dannon or I use the one from Aldi most of the time, and that works. Okay, all my jars are filled now, so I have 4 quarts and 5 pints, and it looks like I guessed just right for how many to make. So now the next step is just a matter of time. What I do is I set a timer for every half hour, 45 minutes. Right now, I'll probably set it for 45 minutes and go from there because I know it's going to take a while, especially for these big ones to cool. And then I'll check them again to see kind of where they are in temp. And then once they reach 115, I will be back. We're getting super close on the small ones. And then, so you can see, not real far off on these either, but notice how they are certainly a little bit higher. It's kind of cool in here right now, so that helps them cool off a little quicker. But we're almost there. One other thing to do is, this is my old yogurt. I'll go ahead and set it out so it can kind of come up to a warmer temperature. It helps rather than it being super cold. So I've been told anyway. I usually make it a point to let it come up to that temp before adding individual amounts into here. Alrighty, these have reached the temperature. These are still about 5 degrees warmer than these little ones, but they're all in the zone that I feel like it's safe enough to inoculate them, which is less than 115. These are actually right at 115, so I think we're 110, but they should be good for inoculating. Here is my old yogurt. All I am going to do is stir that up. Sorry for the loud clang. That way the whey mixes in with the yogurt itself, and then I'm just going to give each one a nice big old tablespoon or so full. And it does not need to be any kind of perfect measure. I just usually do about a tablespoon for the quarts. You can see that's kind of runny, where it's had kind of a lot of whey in it that's separated, and I just mix it in. The yogurt itself, when I first made it, was pretty thick. I don't usually take the time to do a Greek yogurt, like where you have to strain it the extra time, because frankly, I just don't care. I am probably still putting about the same amount in these little ones as what I am in the big ones. And sometimes if I have enough left from my old batch, I'll give the big ones just a little extra, since they kind of need a little more to get going. But I don't do much more than that tablespoon and a half. Once I get all that done, I just stir each one. And I know that metal on glass probably isn't very pleasant sounding. Again, you can use plastic if you want to. I don't know that it'll really hurt anything. I just prefer not to with this thing. I have enough canning jars sitting around, so I figure it's fine. The trick's going to be is I don't normally make a batch this big. It's fitting them all on my crock pot. The rest of that yogurt we can just eat right up this afternoon or something, but at this point, we've had it a while. I'm kind of blessed that it's lasted as long as it has, because where I was out of town and such, it could have easily started to go bad, but it didn't. So next step is to put these on the crock pot. I'm going to pause the video and then I'll show you what it looks like when I'm done. Alright, so I've got it all in the crock pot somehow, some way. It was barely enough to fit there. You have to be careful when you do this that you balance it okay, because if you put all of them on one side, it's going to go flying, so be cognizant of that. The last thing I do is I go ahead and turn it down to keep warm, or whatever setting you have, but I go ahead and I cover it with a towel, and that kind of helps trap the heat in there so it doesn't get too cold, and it seems to keep it incubated at a great temperature. And there you go, there's making whole milk yogurt. Alright, a couple other things that I forgot to mention. One was how long to let this sit. Ultimately, that's going to vary depending on how well your temperature is maintained. But usually, when I do yogurt, I try to make sure I get it started the very first steps, not long after breakfast. And then, like right now, when I just finished getting this on the crock pot, it's about 11:30 in the afternoon, and this will sit here several hours and incubate, and probably after dinner time it should be ready. So a few hours, give or take. I know that is not very exact, but the best thing you can do is keep an eye on your temperature, especially the first 2 or 3 times you do this. Make sure you maintain at least around, I think, 95 plus, and don't go any higher than 115 or you will kill off all that beautiful good bacteria. It is fine to lift it and check it. What I do is I just kind of lift it and I leave the towel over it, and I'll just do little quick temp checks on it, and then you're good to go. By evening it should be fine. You can see that it's good and thick. Typically my homemade yogurt's pretty thick. It's not Greek yogurt thick, but it's a little thicker than store-bought. And that's totally fine for me. If you want to get it thicker, you can do things like draining off the whey and straining it. I have never bothered. All you have to do is just cap it and go ahead and put it in the fridge, which is why I like incubating in these jars. Just literally cap it and you're done, so you don't have to put it into special containers. If you wanted, you could go ahead and put it in small serving size containers. I don't go ahead and sweeten it or do anything to it because I want to keep it plain. When I go to eat it, because I try to keep very low carb, I usually do some stevia drops, and sometimes I'll use just a little bit of sugar-free like raspberry jam or something like that. But you have to be really, really careful because you can add up carbs on that fast. But if you're not trying to keep low carb, there's lots of things you can do. Another thing I like to do is add fresh berries or something like that in there. So you can experiment and play with it even though you're making it plain to start with. You can do cinnamon and all kinds of things. My kids like bananas in it sometimes. So just experiment or just eat it plain. Offhand yogurt's pretty good for you and helps your tummy a lot. So I'm probably not going to show you the very last process of putting the lids on tonight because I'm sure you guys can do the lids. We've got stuff going on. We have a house to go see and things like that tonight. So it's going to be really, really busy, but at least I got most of this process in for you. I hope you guys have enjoyed how to make yogurt. Have a blessed day.